Chapter 10 of David Crockett, His Life and Adventures. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Brett W. Downey. David Crockett, His Life and Adventures by John S.C. Abbott. Chapter 10. Crockett's Tour to the North and the East. Colonel Crockett, having been re-elected again, repaired to Washington. During the session, to complete his education, and the better to prepare himself as a legislator for the whole nation, he decided to take a short trip to the North and the East. His health had also begun to fail, and his physicians advised him to go. He was thoroughly acquainted with the Great West. With his rifle upon his shoulder, in the Creek War, he had made wide explorations through the South. But the North and the East were regions as yet unknown to him. On the 25th of April, 1834, he left Washington for this northern tour. He reached Baltimore that evening, where he was invited to a supper by some of the leading gentlemen. He writes: "Early next morning I started for Philadelphia, a place where I had never been. I sort of felt lonesome as I went down to the steamboat. The idea of going among a new people, where there are tens of thousands who would pass me by without knowing or caring who I was, who are all taken up with their own pleasures or their own business, made me feel small. And indeed, if any one who reads this book has a grand idea of his own importance, let him go to a big city, and he will find that he is not higher valued than a coonskin. The steamboat was the Carroll of Carrollton, a fine craft, with the rum old Commodore Chaytor for head man. A good fellow he is, all sorts of a man, bowing and scraping to the ladies, nodding to the gentlemen, cursing the crew, and his right eye broadcast upon the opposition line, all at the same time. 'Let's go,' said the old one, and off we walked in prime style. Our passage down Chesapeake Bay was very pleasant. In a very short run we came to a place where we were to get on board the rail cars. This was a clean new sight to me. About a dozen big stages hung on to one machine. After a good deal of fuss we all got seated and moved slowly off, the engine wheezing as though she had the tizzic. By and by she began to take short breaths, and away we went, with a blue streak after us. The whole distance is 17 miles. It was run in 55 minutes. At Delaware City I again embarked on board of a splendid steamboat. When dinner was ready I sat down with the rest of the passengers. Among them was Reverend O.B. Brown, of the Post Office Department, who sat near me. During dinner he ordered a bottle of wine, and called upon me for a toast. Not knowing whether he intended to compliment me, or abash me among so many strangers, or have some fun at my expense, I concluded to go ahead and give him and his like a blizzard. So our glasses being filled, the word went round, 'A toast from Colonel Crockett!' I give it as follows: 'Here's wishing the bones of tyrant kings may answer in hell, in place of gridirons, to roast the souls of Tories on.' At this the parson appeared as if he was stumped. I said, 'Never heed. It was meant for where it belonged.' He did not repeat his invitation, and I ate my dinner quietly. After dinner I went up on the deck, and saw the captain hoisting 3 flags. Says I, 'What does that mean?' He replied that he was under promise to the citizens of Philadelphia, if I was on board, to hoist his flags, as a friend of mine had said he expected I would be along soon. We went on till we came in sight of the city, and as we advanced towards the wharf, I saw the whole face of the earth covered with people, all anxiously looking on towards the boat. The captain and myself were standing on the bow deck. He pointed his finger at me, and people slung their hats, and huzzaed for Colonel Crockett. It struck me with astonishment to hear a strange people huzzahing for me, and made me feel sort of queer. It took me so uncommon unexpected, as I had no idea of attracting attention. But I had to meet it, and so I stepped on to the wharf, where the folks came crowding around me, saying, 'Give me the hand of an honest man.' I did not know what all this meant, but some gentlemen took hold of me, and pressing through the crowd, put me into an elegant barouche, drawn by 4 fine horses. They then told me to bow to the people. I did so, and with much difficulty we moved off. The streets were crowded to a great distance, and the windows full of people looking out, I suppose, to see the wild man. I thought I had rather be in the wilderness with my gun and dogs than to be attracting all that fuss. I had never seen the like before, did not know exactly what to say or do. After some time we reached the United States Hotel in Chestnut Street. A crowd had followed me, filling up the street and pressing into the house to shake hands. I was conducted upstairs and walked out on a platform, drew off my hat, and bowed round to the people. They cried out from all quarters, "A speech! A speech! Colonel Crockett!" After the noise had quit, so I could be heard, I said to them the following words: "Gentlemen of Philadelphia, my visit to your city is rather accidental. I had no expectation of attracting any uncommon attention. I am travelling for my health, without the least wish of exciting the people in such times of high political feeling. I do not wish to encourage it. I am unable at this time to find language suitable to return my gratitude to the citizens of Philadelphia. However, I am almost induced to believe it flattery, perhaps a burlesque. This is new to me, yet I see nothing but friendship in your faces, and if your curiosity is to hear the backwoodsman, I will assure you I am illy prepared to address this most enlightened people. However, gentlemen, if this is a curiosity to you, if you will meet me tomorrow at 1 o'clock, I will endeavor to address you in my plain manner." So I made my obeisance to them, and retired into the house. It is true that there was much of a mere curiosity in the desire to see Colonel Crockett. He was a strange and an incomprehensible man. His manly, honest course in Congress had secured much respect. But such developments of character as were shown in his rude and vulgar toast, before a party of gentlemen and ladies, excited astonishment. His notoriety preceded him wherever he went, and all were alike curious to see so strange a specimen of a man. The next morning several gentlemen called upon him, and took him in a carriage to see the various objects of interest in the city. The gentlemen made him a present of a rich seal, representing 2 horses at full speed, with the words, "Go ahead." The young men also made him a present of a truly magnificent rifle. From Philadelphia he went to New York. The shipping astonished him. "They beat me all hollow," he says, "and looked for all the world like a big clearing in the west, with the dead trees all standing." There was a great crowd upon the wharf to greet him, and when the captain of the boat led him conspicuously forward, and pointed him out to the multitude, the cheering was tremendous. A committee conducted him to the American Hotel, and treated him with the greatest distinction. Again he was feted, and loaded with the greatest attentions. He was invited to a very splendid supper, got up in his honor, at which there were 100 guests. The Honorable Judge Clayton of Georgia was present, and made a speech which, as Crockett says, fairly made the tumblers hop. Crockett was then called up as the undeviating supporter of the Constitution and the laws. In response to this toast, he says, "I made a short speech, and concluded with a story of the red cow, which was, that as long as General Jackson went straight, I followed him. But when he began to go this way, and that way, and every way, I wouldn't go after him. Like the boy whose master ordered him to plow across the field to the red cow. Well, he began to plow, and she began to walk, and he plowed all forenoon after her. So when the master came, he swore at him for going so crooked. 'Why, sir,' said the boy, 'you told me to plow to the red cow, and I kept after her, but she always kept moving.'" His trip to New York was concluded by his visiting Jersey City to witness a shooting match with rifles. He was invited to try his hand. Standing at the distance of 120 feet, he fired twice, striking very near the center of the mark. Some one then put up $0.25 in the midst of a black spot, and requested him to shoot at it. The bullet struck the coin, and, as Crockett says, made sleight of hand work with it. From New York he went to Boston. There, as an opponent of some of President Jackson's measures, which were most offensive to the New England people, he was feted with extraordinary enthusiasm. He dined and supped, made speeches, which generally consisted of but one short anecdote, and visited nearly all the public institutions. Just before this, Andrew Jackson had received from Harvard University the honorary title of LL.D. Jackson was no longer a favorite of Crockett. The new distinguished guest, the renowned bear hunter, was in his turn invited to visit Harvard. He writes, "There was some gentlemen that invited me to go to Cambridge, where the big college or university is, where they keep ready-made titles or nicknames to give people. I would not go, for I did not know but they might stick an LL.D. on me before they let me go, and I had no idea of changing Member of the House of Representatives of the United States for what stands for lazy, lounging dunce, which I am sure my constituents would have translated my new title to be. Knowing that I had never taken any degree, and did not own to any, except a small degree of good sense, not to pass for what I was not, I would not go it. There had been one doctor made from Tennessee already, and I had no wish to put on the cap and bells. I told them that I did not go to this branding school. I did not want to be tarred with the same stick. One dignitary was enough from Tennessee. That as far as my learning went, I would stand over it, and spell a strive or two with any of them, from A to crucifix, which was where I left off at school. A gentleman at a dinner party very earnestly invited Crockett to visit him. He returned the compliment by saying, "If you ever come to my part of the country, I hope you will call and see me." "And how shall I find where you live?" the gentleman inquired. "Why, sir," Crockett answered, "run down the Mississippi till you come to the Oberon River. Run a small streak up that, jump ashore anywhere, and inquire for me." From Boston he went to Lowell. The hospitality he had enjoyed in Boston won his warmest commendation. At Lowell he was quite charmed by the aspect of wealth, industry, and comfort which met his eye. Upon his return to Boston, he spent the evening with several gentlemen and ladies at the pleasant residence of Lieutenant Governor Armstrong. In reference to this visit, he writes, "This was my last night in Boston, and I am sure, if I never see the place again, I never can forget the kind and friendly manner in which I was treated by them. It appeared to me that everybody was anxious to serve me, and make my time agreeable. And as a proof that comes home, when I called for my bill next morning, I was told there was no charge to be paid by me, and that he was very much delighted that I had made his house my home. I forgot to mention that they treated me so in Lowell, but it is true. This was to me, at all events, proof enough of Yankee liberality, and more than they generally get credit for. In fact, from the time I entered New England, I was treated with the greatest friendship, and, I hope, never shall forget it. And I wish all who read this book, and who were never there, would take a trip among them. If they don't learn how to make money, they will know how to use it. And if they don't learn industry, they will see how comfortable everybody can be that turns his hands to some employment." Crockett was not a mere joker. He was an honest man and an earnest man, and under the tuition of Congress had formed some very decided political principles, which he vigorously enforced with his rude eloquence. When he first went to Congress he was merely a big boy, of very strong mind, but totally uninformed and uncultivated. He very rapidly improved under the tuition of Congress, and in some degree awoke to the consciousness of his great intellectual imperfections. Still he was never diffident. He closed one of his offhand after-dinner speeches in Boston by saying, "Gentlemen of Boston, I come here as a private citizen, to see you, and not to show myself. I had no idea of attracting attention, but I feel it my duty to thank you, with my gratitude to you, and with a gratitude to all who have given a plain man, like me, so kind a reception. I come from a great way off, but I shall never repent of having been persuaded to come here, and get a knowledge of your ways, which I can carry home with me. We only want to do away with prejudice, and give the people information. I hope, gentlemen, you will excuse my plain, unvarnished ways, which may seem strange to you here. I never had but 6 months' schooling in all my life, and I confess I consider myself a poor tyke to be here addressing the most intelligent people in the world. But I think it the duty of every representative of the people, when he is called upon, to give his opinions, and I have tried to give you a little touch of mine." Every reader will be interested in the perusal of the following serious speech which he made in Boston. It is a fair specimen of his best efforts, and will give one a very correct idea of his trains of thought and modes of expression. It also clearly shows the great questions which agitated the country at that time. It can easily be perceived that, as a stump orator in the far West, Crockett might have exercised very considerable power. This phase of his peculiar character is as worthy of consideration as any other. "Gentlemen, by the entire friendship of the citizens of Boston, as well as the particular friendship which you have received me this evening, I have been brought to reflect on times that have gone by, and review a prejudice that has grown up with me, as well as thousands of my Western and Southern friends. We have always been taught to look upon the people of New England as a selfish, cunning set of fellows that was fed on fox ears and thistle tops, that cut their wisdom teeth as soon as they were born, that made money by their wits and held on to it by nature, that called cheatery mother wit, that hung on to political power because they had numbers, that raised up manufacturers to keep down the South and West, and, in fact, had so much of the devil in all their machinery that they would neither lead nor drive unless the load was going into their own cribs. But I assure you, gentlemen, I begin to think different of you, and I think I see a good many good reasons for so doing. I don't mean that because I eat your bread and drink your liquor that I feel so. No, that don't make me see clearer than I did. It is your habits, and your manners and customs, your industry, your proud, independent spirits, your hanging on to the eternal principles of right and wrong, your liberality and prosperity, and your patience when you are ground down by legislation, which, instead of crushing you, whets your invention to strike a path without a blaze on a tree to guide you, and above all, your never-dying, deathless grip to our glorious Constitution. These are the things that make me think you are a mighty good people." Here the speaker was interrupted by great applause. "Gentlemen, I believe I spoke the truth, and not flattery. I ain't used to oily words. I am used to speak what I think, of men and to men. I am, perhaps, more of a come by chance than any of you ever saw. I have made my way to the place I now fill, without wealth, and against education. I was raised from obscurity, and placed in the high councils of the nation, by the kindness and liberality of the good people of my district, a people whom I will never be unfaithful to, here or elsewhere. I love them, and they have honored me, and according as God has given me judgment, I'll use it for them, come of me what may. These people once passed sentence upon me of a 2 years' stay at home, for exercising that which I contend belongs to every free man in this nation. That was, for differing in opinion with the chief magistrate of this nation. I was well acquainted with him. He was but a man, and, if I was not before, my constituents have made a man of me. I had marched and countermarched with him. I had stood by him in the wars, and fought under his flag at the polls. I helped to heap the measure of glory that has crushed and smashed everything that has come into contact with it. I helped to give him the name of hero, which, like lightning from heaven, has scorched and blasted everything that stood in its way. A name which, like the prairie fire, you have to burn against, or you are gone. A name which ought to be the first in war and last in peace. A name which, like Jack o' the lantern, blinds your eyes while you follow it through the mud and mire. Gentlemen, I never opposed Andrew Jackson for the sake of popularity. I knew it was a hard row to hoe. But I stood up to the rack, considering it a duty I owed to the country that governed me. I had reviewed the course of other presidents, and came to the conclusion that he did not of right possess any more power than those that had gone before him. When he transcended that power, I put down my foot. I knew his popularity, that he had come into place with the largest majority of any one that had gone before him, who had opposition. But still, I did not consider this as giving him the right to do as he pleased, and construe our Constitution to meet his own views. We had lived the happiest people under the sun for 50 years, governed by the Constitution and laws, on well-established constructions. When I saw the government administered on new principles, I objected, and was politically sacrificed. I persisted in my sins, having a clear conscience, that before God and my country I had done my duty. My constituents began to look at both sides, and finally, at the end of 2 years, approving of my course, they sent me back to Congress, a circumstance which was truly gratifying to me. Gentlemen, I opposed Andrew Jackson in his famous Indian bill, where $500,000 were voted for expenses, no part of which has yet been accounted for, as I have seen. I thought it extravagant as well as impolitic. I thought the rights reserved to the Indians were about to be frittered away, and events proved that I thought correct. I had considered a treaty as the sovereign law of the land, but now saw it considered as a matter of expedience, or not, as it pleased the powers that be. Georgia bid defiance to the treaty-making power, and set at naught the Intercourse Act of 1802. She trampled it under foot. She nullified it, and for this she received the smiles and approbation of Andrew Jackson. And this induced South Carolina to nullify the tariff. She had a right to expect that the President was favorable to the principle, but he took up the rod of correction and shook it over South Carolina, and said at the same time to Georgia, "You may nullify, but South Carolina shall not." This was like his consistency in many other matters. When he was a senator in Congress, he was a friend to internal improvements, and voted for them. Everything then that could cement the states together, by giving them access the one to the other, was right. When he got into power, some of his friends had hard work to dodge, and follow, and shout. I called off my dogs and quit the hunt. Yes, gentlemen, Pennsylvania and Ohio and Tennessee and other states voted for him as a supporter of internal improvements. Was he not a tariff man? Who dared deny it? When did we first hear of his opposition? Certainly not in his expression that he was in favor of a judicious tariff. That was supposed to be a clincher, even in New England, until after power lifted him above the opposition of the supporters of a tariff. He was for putting down the monster party and being the president of the people. Well, in one sense, this he tried to do. He put down everyone he could who was opposed to him, either by reward or punishment. And could all have come into his notions, and bowed the knee to his image, I suppose it might have done very well, so far as he was concerned. Whether it would have been a fair reading of his famous letter to Mr. Monroe is rather questionable. He was to reform the government. Now, if reformation consists in turning out and putting in, he did it with a vengeance. He was, last of all, to retrench the expenditures. Well, in time, I have no doubt this must be done. But it will not consist in the abolishing useless expenditures of former administrations. No, gentlemen, the spoils belong to the victor, and it would never do to lessen the teats when the litter was doubled. The treasury trough had to be extended, and the pap thickened. Kin were to be provided for, and if all things keep on as they are, his own extravagances will have to be retrenched, or you will get your tariff up again as high as you please. I recollect a boy once who was told to turn the pigs out of the cornfield. Well, he made a great noise, hallooing and calling the dogs, and came back. By and by his master said, "Jim, you rascal, you didn't turn out the pigs." "Sir," said he, "I called the dogs and set them a-barking." So it was with that big retrenchment report, in 1828. Major Hamilton got Chilton's place as chairman, and called the dogs. Ingham worked honestly, like a beaver. Wycliffe was as keen as a cutworm. All of them worked hard, and they did really, I suppose, convince themselves that they had found out a great deal of iniquity, or, what was more desirable, convince the people that Andrew Jackson and his boys were the only fellows to mend shoes for nothing, and find their own candles. Everett and Sargent, who made the minority report, were scouted at. What has come of all this? Nothing. Worse than nothing. Jackson used these very men like dogs. They knew too much, and must be got rid of, or they would stop his profligacy too. They were greased and swallowed, and he gave them up to the torments of an anti-Jackson conscience. Yes, gentlemen, as long as you think with him, very well, but if not, clear out. Make way for some fellow who has saved his wind, because he has just begun to huzzah has more wind to spare. General Jackson has turned out more men for opinion's sake than all other presidents put together, 5 times over. And the broom sweeps so low that it reaches the humblest officer who happens to have a mean neighbor to retail any little story which he may pick up. I voted for Andrew Jackson because I believed he possessed certain principles, and not because his name was Andrew Jackson, or the hero, or Old Hickory. And when he left those principles which induced me to support him, I considered myself justified in opposing him. This thing of man worship I am a stranger to. I don't like it. It taints every action of life. It is like a skunk getting into a house. Long after he is cleared out, you smell him in every room and closet, from the cellar to the garret. I know nothing by experience of party discipline. I would rather be a raccoon dog and belong to a negro in the forest than to belong to any party, further than to do justice to all, and to promote the interests of my country. The time will and must come when honesty will receive its reward, and when the people of this nation will be brought to a sense of their duty, and will pause and reflect how much it costs us to redeem ourselves from the government of one man. It cost the lives and fortunes of thousands of the best patriots that ever lived. Yes, gentlemen, hundreds of them fell in sight of your own city. I this day walked over the great battle ground of Bunker's Hill, and thought whether it was possible that it was moistened with the sacred blood of our heroes in vain, and that we should forget what they fought for. I hope to see our once happy country restored to its former peace and happiness, and once more redeemed from tyranny and despotism, which I fear we are on the very brink of. We see the whole country in commotion, And for what? Because, gentlemen, the true friends of liberty see the laws and Constitution blotted out from the heads and hearts of the people's leaders, and their requests for relief are treated with scorn and contempt. They meet the same fate that they did before King George and his Parliament. It has been decided by a majority of Congress that Andrew Jackson shall be the government, and that his will shall be the law of the land. He takes the responsibility, and vetoes any bill that does not meet his approbation. He takes the responsibility, and seizes the treasury, and removes it from where the laws had placed it, and now, holding purse and sword, has bid defiance to Congress and to the nation. Gentlemen, if it is for opposing those high-handed measures that you compliment me, I say I have done so and will do so now and forever. I will be no man's man, and no party's man, other than to be the people's faithful representative, and I am delighted to see the noble spirit of liberty retained so boldly here, where the first spark was kindled, and I hope to see it shine and spread over our whole country. Gentlemen, I have detained you much longer than I intended. Allow me to conclude by thanking you for your attention and kindness to the stranger from the far West." The following extract also shows the candor of his mind, his anxiety to learn, and the progress his mind was making in the science of political economy. "I come to your country to get a knowledge of things, which I could get in no other way but by seeing with my own eyes, and hearing with my awful ears, information I can't get, and nobody else, from book knowledge. I come, fellow citizens, to get a knowledge of the manufacturing interest of New England. I was over-persuaded to come by a gentleman who had been to Lowell and seen the manufactories of your state. By General Thomas, of Louisiana, he persuaded me to come and see. When I was first chose to Congress, I was opposed to the protecting system. They told me it would help the rich and hurt the poor, and that we in the West was to be taxed by it for the benefit of New England. I supposed it was so, but when I come to hear it argued in the Congress of the nation, I begun to have a different opinion of it. I saw I was opposing the best interest of the country, especially for the industrious poor man. I told my people who sent me to Congress that I should oppose it no longer, that without it we should be obliged to pay a tax to the British government, and support them instead of our own labor. And I am satisfied of it the more since I have visited New England. Only let the Southern gentlemen come here and examine the manufactories, and see how it is, and it would make more peace than all the legislation in Congress can do. It would give different ideas to them who have been deluded, and spoke in strong terms of dissolving the Union." Crockett returned to Washington just in time to be present at the closing scenes, and then set out for home. So much had been said of him in the public journals, of his speeches and his peculiarities, that his renown now filled the land. End of chapter. Recording by Brett Downey.